What is up, you guys? Greg here with you, just bringing you a little Jesus nugget for the day. Hope you guys are well. Let me start out with a question. How many of you guys wear glasses or contacts, and if you didn't have them on, you would just simply be a hot mess? Like your vision would just be blurred, and you probably couldn't tell who was in front of you within like 2-3 feet. How many of you guys have ever struggled to see something that's right in front of you, and maybe you had a friend point it out to you and you just thought to yourself, like, how could I be so incredibly blind? Well, for me, it was several years ago. I was driving down the road and my dad asked me to look at the FedEx truck and find the arrow. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I remember struggling with it for like a month. And when I finally saw it, my eyes were opened. I saw the FedEx arrow, and basically I couldn't unsee it. My eyes would go straight to the arrow, and they still do to this day, every day, every time that I see one. So the truth is that we all struggle with our sight, whether we realize it or not. And during this time, many of us are struggling to see Jesus clearly, or even being able to see Jesus at all. And when you look for him in your life or in the world, you're struggling to see the arrow. Are you struggling to see his love? Are you struggling to see his hand in your life, or in the current cultural climate of this moment? Do you see Jesus' goodness? Or do you, like me today, feel like, man, I need some new Jesus lenses? There is a lot going on. Well, in Mark chapter 8, verses 22 through 26, we read a story of Jesus healing a blind man. But it's not just solely for the blind man, but it's for his sight-impaired disciples, and maybe even for you and I. So let's look at Mark chapter 8, verses 22 through 26. Now, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up, the man, and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't go into the village." Let me give you a quick background for this passage. Within likely a few days of when Jesus healed this blind man, he had just shown his really nearsighted disciples the proverbial FedEx arrow, i.e., that he was God in the flesh. And how did he do this? Just a passage before, he had fed 4,000 men with 7 loaves of bread and just a few small fish. Literally before their eyes, he had made bread and fish multiply out of thin air, and he fed everyone. Now, shortly after this, Jesus and his disciples, they get back in the boat and they start sailing away. Only for the disciples to start worrying because they have 1 loaf of bread with them in the boat. And they almost kind of start to panic and think maybe that they're going to starve when they actually have the bread of life, Jesus himself, in the boat with them. And so this is where we see that the healing of the blind man in the passage right after this, it's not just for the blind man himself, but it's for the nearsighted disciples. It's for you and for me. And in verse 23, Jesus takes the blind man by the hand. This is so awesome. Jesus, you just get this picture of Jesus just loving this blind man who probably never gets touched. And he's probably with the disciples, and he leads them out of the village, kind of for some small group time. And what happens next? Jesus, he spits on the blind man's eyes, and he lays his hands on him, and he says, "Do you see anything?" And the man says, I see people, but they look like trees walking. In other words, the man can see, but he still can't see clearly. So Jesus, when he lays his hands on the man again, this time he says in verse 25, he opened his eyes, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Now I'll take this one step further, and then I'm going to leave you guys to ponder with this and kind of sit on it by yourself. Now, first off, you might be thinking, why did he have to touch or heal this guy twice? Did it not work? Was Jesus not powerful enough? Did he lose some of his power source the first time, and maybe he just couldn't make it happen? Well, if we've been reading Mark's gospel so far, we know Jesus has the power. We know Jesus has the ability. So there's got to be something more that he's revealing. And if you look closely, Jesus is helping his, once again, nearsighted disciples see himself. Just like the blind man not seeing clearly, they still didn't see Jesus clearly for who he was. The question is, do you? Do I see Jesus clearly? And what he was revealing is that just like this man, they themselves needed a second touch from Jesus. They couldn't see clearly themselves. Jesus wasn't done with this man. Jesus wasn't done with his disciples. Jesus isn't done with you and with me. In fact, he knows good and well that you struggle seeing him. You struggle seeing him clearly. You wrestle with him day by day. And it's hard to know that he is truly Lord and Savior. But he's come to show you and me the proverbial FedEx arrow. He's come to give you and I new eyes. Man, do you guys want that? Do you want that? Is this something you desire? Let me leave you with a couple questions. Where do you struggle today? Where are you struggling to see Jesus for who he truly is? And where have you purposefully been kind of closing your eyes to his power? What about your life is in desperate need of a second touch from Jesus? And lastly, come to him freely. And if you can't, like verse 22 says, have some people bring you to Jesus. That's the beautiful part. This man didn't bring himself. His friends brought him. And Jesus loved him. Jesus healed him and let him see. Love you guys. Pray that we can see more clearly and worship Jesus.